Story 1. Omaima Arif was born in Cairo, Egypt in 1968. She was one of 16 children in her family. Her father was the head of the household and made most of the important decisions. Her mother raised Omaima and two of her sisters in a poor part of the city. This area was located close to a large cemetery, which is called a necropolis. Money was tight and life was hard for the family. When Omaima was 6 years old, her father decided that she should undergo a traditional female circumcision. This was a painful procedure that was done according to local customs. She had no choice in the matter. The experience was traumatic for her, but at that time she did not speak about it to many people. She grew up with many siblings around her, but the household was crowded and resources were limited. In 1986, when Omaima was about 18 years old, she married an American citizen named Roger Stainbrook. She married him so she could move to the United States. After the marriage, she immigrated to America and settled in Southern California. The marriage did not last long, and they later divorced. After the divorce, she needed to support herself. She found work as a nanny for a family, taking care of children. Later, she also got a job as a model at South Coast Plaza, which is a large shopping center in Costa Mesa. Omaima was a social person who liked to go out. She often visited bars and would talk to older men. She used different names when she went out, such as Ishta or Nadia. She had multiple relationships at the same time with different boyfriends. She did not stay with one man for very long. Some people who knew her thought she was very friendly with men and that she used her looks to get attention. In 1989, Omaima obtained a driver's license. After that, she had many problems with driving. She received 12 traffic violations. One of these problems involved a car that belonged to a boyfriend named Jack Houston. Jack was 38 years old. Omaima took his car without permission and did not return it. This was treated as a theft, and it added to her record of legal troubles. In November 1990, a 61-year-old man named Robert Hansen lived in Huntington Beach. He accused Omaima of attempted robbery. He said that during a consensual bondage session, she pointed a gun at him while he was tied up. However, no official charges were filed against her by the Orange County Sheriff's Department. The matter was reported, but did not go to court. Another boyfriend of Omaima was a man named Richard Gray. During their relationship, Richard accused Omaima of putting a knife to his throat. Later, when she was asked about this, she said that it happened during a sex game and that he had agreed to it. She claimed it was consensual, but the accusation remained on record. In 1989, Omaima had a physical fight with a female security guard. The guard caught her shoplifting at a thrifty store. During the confrontation, Omaima bit the security guard on her breast. This led to a charge of battery against Omaima. This was another incident that showed she could become violent when she was confronted. In October 1991, Omaima was 23 years old. She went to a bar in Huntington Beach and started playing pool. There, she met a man named William Edwin Nelson, who was called Bill. Bill was 56 years old, which made him more than twice her age. He worked as a pilot for a company in Laredo, Texas, but he also lived in Costa Mesa, where he worked as a computer programmer. Bill had recently been released from prison. He had served 4 years for trying to smuggle 100 tons of marijuana from Mexico through his job as a pilot. He was out of prison and trying to rebuild his life. Bill and Omaima hit it off quickly. According to Omaima, Bill proposed to her just 2 days after they met. She said yes. They told people that they got married in an Egyptian ceremony on November 1st, 1991. They claimed the ceremony took place in either Las Vegas, Nevada, or Phoenix, Arizona. However, when officials checked later, neither city had any record of a marriage license or ceremony for them. The legal status of their marriage was unclear. Bill's attorney, John Fitzgibbon Sr., met the couple during their honeymoon in Laredo on November 3rd. He saw them together and thought they seemed like a happy couple. However, some of Bill's acquaintances and coworkers had doubts. They noticed that Omema was much younger than Bill. They suspected that she might have married him for his money. Bill was not completely divorced from his previous wife, Kathy Nelson, at that time. An attorney who represented Kathy said that the divorce proceedings were not yet finished. This meant that Bill might not have been legally free to marry Omema. The prosecution later questioned whether their marriage was even valid. Despite these doubts, Omema and Bill lived together in an apartment on Eldon Street in Costa Mesa. They appeared affectionate to outsiders. Omema continued to work and live her daily life. She had a history of troubled relationships, legal incidents, and accusations of violence from past boyfriends. She also had a past that included childhood trauma and a difficult upbringing in Egypt. Her life in America was marked by a series of small but serious incidents with the law and with men. She had not yet committed the murder, but her past showed a pattern of conflict, impulsive behavior, and physical fights. On the night of November 28, 1991, Omema and Bill Nelson were in their apartment on Eldon Street in Costa Mesa. According to Omema, Bill tied her to the bed during a bondage sex game. She claimed that he then sexually assaulted her while she was restrained. She said she managed to break free from the ropes or ties that held her. Once she was free, she picked up a lamp and hit Bill with it. She then took a pair of scissors and stabbed him multiple times. After that, she took a clothes iron and beat him with it. The official cause of death was later determined to be multiple stab wounds. Bill died in the apartment that night. After Bill was dead, Omema began to cut up his body. This process took many hours. She used knives and other tools to dismember him. Neighbors later reported that they heard the garbage disposal unit in the apartment running for a very long time that night. The disposal ran for hours after the time of Bill's death. Omema cooked Bill's head in a pot. She also boiled his hands. She did this to remove his fingerprints so that the body could not be easily identified. She mixed some of his body parts with leftover turkey that she had in the kitchen. She put many of the remains through the garbage disposal to get rid of them. Omema also castrated Bill. This means she removed his genitals. She later told her psychiatrist that she did this as revenge for the sexual assault she said she had experienced. She also told the psychiatrist that she had cooked Bill's ribs in barbecue sauce and eaten them. However, she has consistently denied this claim since then. The psychiatrist later said that the 12 hours of dismemberment were done while she was in a trance-like state. He believed she had a psychotic episode during the act. After she finished dismembering the body, Omema took Bill's 1975 Corvette and started driving around Orange County. She went to see people she knew. She wanted to find someone who would help her get rid of the rest of Bill's remains. She went to see her former boyfriend Richard Gray at his house in Anaheim. She tried to tell him what had happened and asked for his help. Richard Gray refused to listen to her story. He told her to leave his house. After she left, Gray called the police and told them something was wrong. Later, in the early morning of December 1st, Omema went to another acquaintance. This was a 27-year-old man named Jose Esquivel. She went to his house on Monte Vista Avenue. She showed him cuts on her chest, thighs, and feet. She also showed him ligature marks on her wrists. These were marks left by the ropes or ties. She told Jose that her husband had sexually assaulted her. Then she asked Jose to help her dispose of the body. She had brought a garbage bag with her that contained Bill's entrails and his dentures. She wanted Jose to help her dump these items into the back bay in Newport Beach. She offered to pay him for his help. She promised him $75,000 from a safe that she said was in the apartment. She also offered him some appliances. In reality, the safe only contained $100. Jose told Omema that he would help her. He said he needed to get his truck, but instead of getting his truck, he called the police. The police were alerted by both Richard Gray and Jose Esquivel. Officers went to the apartment on Eldon Street to investigate. When they entered the apartment, they found a shocking scene. Much of the furniture was stained with blood. Human flesh was scattered around the rooms. Some pieces were wrapped in tinfoil. Others were packed into plastic bags or cardboard boxes. In total, the police found 11 containers inside the house that held body parts. They also found a garbage bag in Bill's Corvette that was stuffed with remains. Inside the apartment, officers found a large soup pot. This pot had been used to cook some of the body parts. They also found a cooler that contained Bill's severed head. A deep fat fryer was found with 2 hands inside. There was also a glass jar that contained something, but the contents were not described in detail in the reports. Bill Nelson had been a large man. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed about 230 pounds. The coroner's office later estimated that the police found only about 150 pounds of human remains. This meant that about 80 pounds of body mass were missing. This missing weight included Bill's genitals, which were never found. Bill's employer had also reported him missing around this time. While the police were searching the apartment, they started to question Omaima. She did not tell them the truth at first. She gave a false story. She claimed that no fight had happened between her and Bill. Instead, she said that on the night of the murder, 2 women and 3 men had entered the apartment. She said these people drugged her, killed Bill, and then tried to frame her. She said they planted the dismembered remains in the apartment after she had lent Bill's car to a neighbor the next day. The police did not believe this story. A medical examination was done on Omaima in December 1991. The doctors found no signs of physical sexual trauma on her body. However, when the pathologist examined Bill Nelson's body, they found ligature markings on his wrists. This meant that Bill had been tied up shortly before he died. This fact would later become important in the case. The police had gathered a large amount of evidence from the apartment. They had the remains, the tools used to cut the body, and the cooking pots. They also had the statements from Richard Gray and Jose Esquivel. They had Omaima's false story and the physical evidence from her body and Bill's body. The investigation was now moving forward, and the police were building a case against her. On December 2nd, 1991, the police arrested Omaima Nelson on a suspicion of murder charge. She was taken into custody and held in jail. The police had gathered enough evidence from the apartment, the statements from Richard Gray and Jose Esquivel, and Omaima's own false stories to move forward with the case. She remained in jail while the prosecutors prepared their case against her. Almost exactly 1 year later, on December 1st, 1992, Omaima's trial began in Santa Ana, California. The court had to decide whether she was guilty of murder. Her defense attorney was a man named Thomas Mooney. He presented a defense based on self-defense. He told the jury that Omaima had been traumatized as a child. He explained that she had undergone female genital mutilation at age 6. He said that because of this, sex was painful and traumatic for her. He also said that she had suffered child abuse in Egypt and that she had battered woman syndrome from her relationship with Bill. He argued that she had been living in constant fear of Bill because he had threatened to kill her and threatened to report her to immigration authorities as an illegal alien, so she would be deported. Omaima herself testified about the alleged sexual assault on the night of the murder. She said that Bill had tied her up and assaulted her, and that she acted in self-defense when she killed him. She also claimed that Bill had been violent and abusive during their 3 weeks of marriage. The prosecution challenged this account. They brought forward Omaima's ex-husband, Roger Stainbrook. He testified that during their marriage, Omaima had never told him that she felt discomfort during sex. This contradicted her claim that sex was always painful for her. The prosecution also called Kathy Nelson, Bill's ex-wife. Kathy testified that Bill had not been violent during their marriage. This was used to question Omaima's story that Bill was an abusive man. The medical evidence was also presented in court. A medical examination of Omaima was done in December 1991, right after the murder. The doctors found no signs of physical sexual trauma on her body. This meant that there was no physical proof that she had been sexually assaulted. On the other hand, the pathology report on Bill Nelson's body showed ligature marks on his wrists. These marks indicated that Bill had been tied up shortly before he died. This fact was important because it suggested that Bill was restrained, which matched Omema's claim that he had tied her up, but it also raised questions about who had tied whom. The jury listened to all the evidence and arguments. They then went to deliberate. They discussed the case for 6 days. On January 12, 1993, they reached a verdict. They found Omema Nelson guilty of second-degree murder. This meant that they believed she had killed Bill, but they did not believe it was premeditated first-degree murder. The judge then sentenced her to 27 years to life in prison. This meant she would have to serve at least 27 years before she could be considered for parole. Omema did not accept the verdict. She appealed her conviction in 1995. Her lawyers argued that there were mistakes in the trial. However, the appeal was unsuccessful. The court upheld her conviction and her sentence. After the trial, Omema was sent to prison. She was first held at the Central California Women's Facility. Later, she was transferred to the California Institution for Women, where she remained for many years. During her time in prison, she had some relationships with men from the outside. In 2006, she claimed to have become a born-again Christian. Around the same time, she gained the right to conjugal visits with a suitor who was in his 70s. She stated that they had become married, but prison officials denied that any legal marriage had taken place. That man later died in 2011. Throughout her incarceration, Omema had disciplinary problems. Her prison record included several infractions. She was written up for fighting with other inmates. She also battered a staff member. She was caught with contraband, which means items that are not allowed in prison. She was also cited for theft, arguing with staff, failing to follow instructions, and not being in compliance with grooming standards. These infractions showed that she did not always follow the rules inside prison. Omema tried to get her conviction overturned by filing petitions for habeas corpus. This is a legal request to be released from unlawful detention. She filed one petition in 2002 and another in 2019. Both times, the circuit court denied her requests. The court did not find any reason to release her. Omema became eligible for parole for the first time in 2006. A parole board reviewed her case. They listened to her statements and looked at her behavior in prison. They decided to deny her parole. Their reason was that they found her unpredictable and that she was a serious threat to public safety. She was not released. She became eligible for parole again in 2011. The parole board reviewed her case once more. This time, they denied her parole because they said she had not taken responsibility for the murder. They also said she would not be a productive citizen if she were freed. They decided she should stay in prison. After the denial in 2011, Omema was told she would not be able to seek parole again until 2026. That is the next time her case will be reviewed. As of now, she remains in prison serving her sentence. The victim, Bill Nelson, died from his injuries in 1991. His body was never fully recovered, and many of his remains were never found. The case was solved through the combined efforts of the police, the evidence found in the apartment, the testimony of witnesses, and the work of the prosecutors and jury. Omema Nelson was convicted and sentenced, and she continues to serve her time behind bars. Omema Nelson remains in prison, and her next chance for parole will not come until 2026. Story 2. Joseph Roy Matheny was born on March 2, 1955. He was born in the United States. His family lived in the area around Baltimore, Maryland. Joseph was one of 6 children in his family. He had 5 brothers or sisters. Joseph's mother worked very hard to support the family. She worked double shifts at her job. This meant she worked 2 full work periods in one day, or she worked many extra hours. She did this because the family did not have much money. She had to be away from home for most of the day and night. Because she was working so much, she could not spend a lot of time with her 6 children at home. Joseph's father was an alcoholic. This meant he drank too much alcohol and could not control his drinking. When Joseph was 6 years old, his father died in a car accident. After his father died, Joseph's mother had to take care of all 6 children by herself. She continued to work long hours to pay for food and housing. Joseph's mother later gave her own account of how Joseph grew up. She said that even though she worked a lot, she made sure her children had a normal family life. She said they never went hungry. She also said that she never sent her children to live with other families. But Joseph told a different story. He said that his parents often sent him to live with other families. He described these arrangements as foster-like, meaning he stayed with people who were not his real parents, similar to a foster home. This was a clear difference between what Joseph said and what his mother said about his childhood. According to his mother, Joseph was a good student in school. She said he was above average, which meant he got better grades than most other students. She also said he was always polite as a child. He was not mean or aggressive. She described his childhood as pretty good. She said that if Joseph felt neglected, it was his own fault, because she believed she had provided a good home for him. When Joseph became older, he decided to join the United States Army. This happened in 1973. He was 18 years old at that time. His mother said that he served in Germany. That was a country in Europe where the American Army had bases. But Joseph himself claimed something different. He said that he had served in Vietnam. Vietnam was a country in Southeast Asia where the United States had fought a long war. Joseph also claimed that while he was in Vietnam, he became addicted to heroin. Heroin is a very dangerous and illegal drug. His mother said she did not remember him ever serving in Vietnam. The newspapers later looked into his service record, but they could not confirm where he actually served. It is important to note that by the time Joseph joined the Army in 1973, the American involvement in the Vietnam War had already ended, so his claim that he served there was not supported by the timeline. After Joseph joined the Army, he almost never contacted his mother again. He stopped calling her and writing to her. He kept moving further away from his family. His mother later said that she believed the worst thing that ever happened to him was drugs. She thought that his drug use ruined his life and changed him from the polite boy he used to be. As an adult, Joseph returned to the Baltimore area. He got a steady job. He worked as a forklift driver. A forklift is a machine used to lift heavy objects in warehouses and factories. He held this job for a long time, so he had a regular income. People who knew him described him in a positive way. They said he was intelligent, which meant he was smart. They also said he was well-spoken, meaning he spoke clearly and politely. He had good manners. He was also known as a practical joker. This meant he liked to tell jokes and make people laugh. He would brighten people's day and make them feel happy. But Joseph also had other habits. He spent a lot of his free time drinking alcohol in bars. He also used drugs. Nearly all of the money he earned from his job went to buying crack cocaine, heroin, and liquor. Crack cocaine and heroin are both illegal and very addictive drugs. Liquor is strong alcohol. He spent almost everything he made on these substances. Joseph did not live in a regular house or apartment. Instead, he lived with groups of homeless men. They set up makeshift camps in South Baltimore. These camps were not permanent buildings. They were tents or shelters made from found materials under bridges or in vacant lots. Joseph chose to live this way even though he had a job and could possibly afford a place to live. His money went to drugs and alcohol instead of rent. So by the time Joseph was in his late 30s and early 40s, he had a stable job but an unstable personal life. He was known as a friendly and funny person to those around him. He was polite and well-mannered. But he also had a serious addiction to drugs and alcohol. He spent his time with homeless groups and outdoor camps. He had cut off contact with his mother and his family. He was living a double life. One part was a steady worker with a good reputation, and the other part was a man who used all his money on illegal substances and lived on the streets. Joseph Matheny continued to live his double life. He went to work at the factory as a forklift driver. People at work liked him. He made them laugh. But away from work, he used drugs and alcohol heavily. He spent time with homeless men in the outdoor camps under bridges. He also began to hurt people. The first known murder happened in 1994. The victim was a woman named Kathy and Magaziner. Matheny killed her by strangling her. He put his hands around her neck and squeezed until she stopped breathing. After she was dead, he buried her body in a shallow grave. This grave was not deep. It was just a hole in the ground. He dug this hole on the property where he worked, at the factory site. He left her body there. 6 months later, in 1995, Matheny went back to the grave. He dug up Kathy's remains. By that time, her body had decomposed. Only her skeleton was left. He took her skull, which is the bone of the head, and put it in a box. He then threw that box in the trash. He did this to hide the evidence. The rest of her skeleton was left at the factory site. Also in 1995, Matheny killed 2 homeless men. Their names were Randall Brewer and Randy Piker. These men lived in a homeless camp under the Hanover Street Bridge in Baltimore. This camp was called a tent city because people used tents and tarps to make shelters. There were groups of homeless people living there. These groups sometimes argued with each other. Matheny used an axe to kill Brewer and Piker. An axe is a tool with a heavy blade on a long handle. He struck them with the axe until they died. He killed both men at the tent city. He later said that he had committed these murders. But at the time, there was a dispute among the homeless groups. Another homeless man named Larry Amos was involved in these events. Amos was accused of stealing the murder weapon and later using it to kill another homeless man named Everett Dowell. The deaths of Brewer and Piker were discovered, and the police became aware of them. However, Matheny was not immediately charged for these 2 deaths. In November 1996, Matheny killed another woman. Her name was Kimberly Lynn Spicer. He killed her by stabbing her with a knife. He pushed the knife into her body multiple times. After she was dead, he hid her body. He kept her body at the factory site where he worked. He did not bury her right away. He hid the body somewhere on the property and left it there for weeks. In December 1996, Matheny committed another crime. This time the victim was a woman named Rita Kemper. On December 8, 1996, Matheny was in his trailer. He was living in a trailer at the pallet factory site at that time. He shared drugs with Rita Kemper. They both took drugs together. Then Matheny wanted her to have sex with him. She refused. She said no. When she refused, Matheny became angry. Rita ran out of the trailer to get away from him. Matheny chased after her. He caught her and beat her. He hit her with his hands. Then he dragged her back into the trailer. He pulled down her pants and tried to force her to have sex with him. This was attempted rape. He also told her that he was going to kill her. He said, "I'm going to kill you and bury you in the woods with the other girls." This showed that he had killed other women before. But Rita did not give up. She found a way to escape. There was a window in the trailer. She climbed through the window and got out. She ran away from the trailer. She ran until she found police officers who were working in the area. She told them what Matheny had done to her. The police now knew about Matheny's attack on Rita Kemper. After this attack, Matheny still had Kimberly Spicer's body hidden at the factory. He had killed her about a month earlier. He needed help to get rid of the body, so he asked a friend to help him bury Spicer's body. He told the friend about the body. The friend agreed to help at first. But then the friend thought about what Matheny had asked. The friend realized that Matheny had committed a murder. Instead of helping Matheny bury the body, the friend made a different choice. The friend went to the police and reported what Matheny had said and done. The friend told the police that Matheny had killed someone and wanted to bury the body. This report from the friend happened on December 15, 1996. At that point, the police were informed about Kimberly Spicer's murder. They knew about the hidden body at the factory site. They also knew about Matheny's attack on Rita Kemper from her earlier report. And they knew about the earlier deaths of Kathy Magaziner from the remains found at the factory, and the two homeless men from 1995. Matheny also made other claims about more victims. He said he had killed 3 female sex workers along Washington Boulevard in Baltimore. But the police could not find any evidence to support this claim besides his own words. He also said he had thrown other bodies into the Patapsco River. He said those bodies were never found. He also made a very strange claim. He said that he had stored some of his victims' body parts in a freezer. He then claimed that he served this meat to people at a barbecue stand. However, the police could not find any evidence to support this story either. There was no freezer with body parts. There was no barbecue stand serving human meat. These were only his words, and they were never proven true. So by mid-December 1996, Matheny had committed multiple murders and an attempted rape. He had killed Kathy Magaziner in 1994. He had killed Randall Brewer and Randy Piker in 1995. He had killed Kimberly Spicer in November 1996. He had attacked Rita Kemper in December 1996. He had hidden bodies at his workplace and at the tent city. A friend had just gone to the police to report Spicer's murder. The police now had information that would lead them to take action. The friend who reported Matheny to the police on December 15, 1996, gave the officers specific information. The friend told them that Matheny had killed a woman named Kimberly Spicer and was hiding her body at the factory site where he worked. The police acted on this information immediately. On that same day, December 15, 1996, the police arrested Joseph Matheny. They charged him with the murder of Kimberly Spicer. At the same time, the police also arrested the owner of the business where Matheny worked. The owner was charged as an accessory after the fact. This meant the owner was accused of helping Matheny after the crime had already been committed. The police believed the owner had helped dispose of evidence related to Spicer's murder. Both Matheny and the business owner were taken into custody as they left a Christmas party together. Once Matheny was in police custody, he began to talk. He did not deny what he had done. Instead, he started confessing to more crimes. He told the police about the murder of Kathy and Magaziner from 1994. He told them where he had buried her body. He then led the police to the shallow grave at the factory site. The police found the remains there. The skull was missing because Matheny had put it in a box and thrown it away. But the rest of the skeleton was still there. The police used dental records to identify the body. Dental records are the x-rays and notes that dentists keep about a person's teeth. These records matched the remains, so the police confirmed that the body was Kathy Magaziner. Matheny also continued to talk about other murders. He said he had killed the 2 homeless men, Randall Brewer and Randy Piker, with an axe in 1995. However, the police already had a different suspect for those deaths. A man named Larry Amos had been arrested and accused of killing those 2 men. Amos had also been accused of killing another homeless man named Everett Dowell. In July 1996, before Matheny's later crimes, a jury had already tried Matheny for the murders of Brewer and Piker. The jury decided that there was not enough evidence to convict him, so he was found not guilty for those 2 deaths in that trial. But now, in his confessions in December 1996, Matheny was saying that he actually had committed those murders. Even with his confession, the legal case for those murders was already closed, so he could not be retried for them. The police then focused on the crimes for which they had clear evidence: the murder of Kimberly Spicer, the murder of Kathy Magaziner, and the attack on Rita Kemper. The first trial that took place was for the attack on Rita Kemper. This trial happened in 1997. Matheny was charged with kidnapping her, attempting to sexually assault her, and attempting to murder her. The prosecution presented evidence from Rita herself, who testified about what Matheny had done to her. She told the court how he beat her, dragged her back into the trailer, pulled down her pants, and tried to rape her. She also told the court that he said he would kill her and bury her with the other girls. The jury believed her testimony. They found Matheny guilty of kidnapping and guilty of attempted sexual assault. For these two crimes, the judge gave him a sentence of 50 years in prison. However, the jury did not convict him of attempting to murder her. He was acquitted of that charge, meaning he was found not guilty of that specific part. The next trial was for the murder of Kimberly Spicer. This trial took place in 1998. The evidence against Matheny was strong. The friend who had reported him to the police testified. The police found Spicer's body at the factory site. Matheny himself had confessed to the crime. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing, the judge asked him why he committed these murders. Matheny gave a direct answer. He said he committed the murders because he enjoyed it. He said he got a rush out of it and got a high out of it. He also said he had no real excuse other than that he liked to do it. Based on the murder conviction, the judge sentenced Matheny to death. This meant he was to be executed by the state. Also in August 1998, Matheny pleaded guilty to the murder of Kathy Magaziner. He also pleaded guilty to robbing her. By pleading guilty, he admitted to the crime without going through a full trial. The prosecutors wanted the death penalty for this case as well. But instead, the judge gave him a sentence of life in prison for this murder. So now Matheny had 3 sentences: 50 years for the attack on Kemper, death for the murder of Spicer, and life in prison for the murder of Magaziner. But the death sentence did not stay in place. In 2001, the death sentence for Spicer's murder was overturned by a higher court. The court explained its reasoning. The death penalty had been given because the murder was committed during a robbery. The law allowed the death penalty if a murder happened while the criminal was also committing a robbery. However, the evidence in Matheny's case showed that robbery was not his motivation for killing Spicer. He had not killed her to steal from her. Because the legal reason for the death penalty was not valid, the court changed the sentence. The death sentence was reduced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This meant Matheny would never be released from prison. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. After that, Matheny remained in prison. He was held at the Western Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. This was a state prison for male inmates. He did not commit any more crimes because he was locked up. He lived in his prison cell for many years. On August 5, 2017, prison guards found Joseph Matheny dead inside his cell. He was 62 years old. The cause of his death was not reported as suspicious. He died from natural causes or illness while serving his life sentence. His victims, Kathy Magaziner, Kimberly Spicer, Randall Brewer, and Randy Piker, were already dead and could not be brought back. Rita Kemper survived the attack and lived her life after the trial. The case of Joseph Matheny was finally over, and he never left prison alive. Joseph Roy Matheny died in his prison cell on August 5, 2017, and his crimes were finally closed. Story 3. Andrew Allen Cook was born in July of 1974 in the state of Georgia. He was born into a family that had a strong connection to law enforcement. His father, John Cook, worked as a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI. His father had held this job for many years and was a dedicated officer. Andrew was not an only child. He had siblings, including a brother and at least 2 sisters. When Andrew was 7 years old, in 1981, his parents made the decision to divorce. This was a major change in his early life. After the divorce, Andrew went to live with his father for a period of time. In 1983, his father remarried. This new marriage created some difficulties in the household. To try and help with these problems, Andrew's father chose to live apart from his new wife for a while, living only with his sons in an attempt to keep things calm. Eventually, Andrew moved from his father's house to go and live with his mother. Andrew's mother later remarried as well. His new stepfather had problems with alcohol and drank too much. From the start, the stepfather did not like Andrew. As time passed, their relationship became very bad. They had many arguments, and the arguments sometimes turned into physical violence. The stepfather would find fault with everything Andrew did. He forced Andrew to do excessive chores around the house and constantly criticized him. The abuse was not just emotional, it was also physical. The stepfather physically hurt Andrew on several occasions. He even threatened to kill Andrew at one point. Andrew's home life became unstable and full of conflict. As a child, Andrew was described as shy and awkward. He did not have many friends. He had trouble in school, and he strongly disliked going to classes. Because of the disruptions in his family and his difficulties at school, his parents took him to see a psychologist in 1984, when he was 9 years old. The psychologist found that Andrew was a sad and troubled child. He seemed to live in his own world and was very withdrawn. The psychologist also learned that Andrew had tried to hurt himself. He had wounded his own wrist and had also threatened to choke himself with a string until he turned red. The psychologist recommended that he receive extra help in school and that his family give him more attention. However, these problems did not go away. By the time Andrew was a teenager, his behavior grew more serious. Around 1989, when he was about 15 years old, he began showing what doctors called antisocial behaviors. He committed a burglary at a neighbor's house. He also stole a box of blank checks and tried to use them fraudulently. He shot a dog. He stole guns. He even carved his own name into his arm with a razor blade. His family became very worried about him. Because his behavior was getting so out of control, his parents had him admitted to a psychiatric hospital called Coliseum Psychiatric Hospital. He stayed there for about 5 weeks. While he was at the hospital, doctors evaluated him. They noted that he was often isolated and lethargic, meaning he had very little energy. He was very angry, and the doctors felt that the problems with his family did not fully explain the rage that he was holding inside. They diagnosed him with major depression and a condition called oppositional defiant disorder. This meant he had a pattern of angry, defiant, and hostile behavior toward authority figures. The doctors recommended that he take medicine for his depression and continue with therapy after he left the hospital. But after he was released, Andrew did not receive the follow-up treatment that was recommended. He did not continue with therapy or take his medicine. After his release from the hospital, Andrew still had problems. He committed another burglary. Because of this, he was arrested by the police. He was placed on probation for 1 year. He did not seem to learn from these punishments. His behavior continued to be a concern for those around him. As he grew into a young adult, he had trouble holding steady relationships with people. He had few friends, and those who knew him described him as unpredictable and quick to get angry. People were sometimes scared of him. He worked at various jobs, including a job at a diaper factory. While working there, he did not seem to be a particularly good or reliable worker. He was not very social. He also developed the habit of chewing tobacco, which he did often. Andrew also developed an interest in guns and weapons from a young age. He started collecting them or acquiring them when he could. In December of 1993, he wanted to buy a 9mm Ruger handgun. But because he was under the legal age to buy a handgun himself, he asked an acquaintance to buy the gun for him. The acquaintance agreed and bought the gun from a local gun store. Andrew now owned this handgun, even though he could not legally purchase it on his own. By 1994, he also owned an AR-15 rifle. He was a young man who had access to powerful weapons, despite his troubled history and his problems with anger. In early 1994, Andrew's mother finally divorced his stepfather. This ended the physical abuse that Andrew had suffered at home. But the divorce did not solve all of Andrew's problems. His mother tried to make up for his difficult childhood by being very lenient with him. She gave him too much freedom and did not enforce strict rules. This did not help him. The family also faced a financial problem. In December of 1994, Andrew's mother was forced to sell their home because she could no longer afford to keep it. This was a very difficult event for Andrew. He had already lost his stable family life, and now he was losing his home as well. He took this loss very hard. He was upset and felt unstable. At this point in his life, Andrew was 20 years old. He lived in a trailer near a lake called Lake Juliet in Monroe County, north of Macon, Georgia. He was a young man with a history of mental health problems, a difficult and abusive childhood, a fascination with guns, and a growing sense of instability and anger. His life had been a series of disruptions, failed treatments, and bad choices. He was still working at the diaper factory. He kept to himself mostly, and did not have a close group of friends. His relationship with his father was strained, but they still spoke occasionally. As the year 1994 came to an end, Andrew was facing the loss of his home and was living with the weight of his past. He was a quiet, angry young man who spent his free time alone, often near the lake where he lived. The year 1994 ended with Andrew Cook feeling unstable. He had lost his home, he had a history of anger problems, and he spent his free time alone near Lake Juliet. On the night of January 2nd, 1995, he got into his car. He drove a 1987 Honda CRX. He drove to a place called The Point. The Point is a small piece of land that sticks out into Lake Juliet in Monroe County, Georgia. It was a place where people often parked their cars, especially couples. It was late at night, around midnight. When Andrew arrived at The Point, he saw another car already parked there. Inside that car were two young people. They were Grant Patrick Hendrickson, who was 22 years old, and Michelle Lee Cartagena, who was 19 years old. Both of them were students at Mercer University. They were a couple, and they had parked at The Point to spend time together. Andrew did not know either of them. He had never met them before. There was no argument between them. They did not say anything to each other. Andrew simply stopped his car near theirs. He then picked up his AR-15 rifle. This was a powerful weapon. He pointed it at the car where the two students were sitting and began to shoot. He fired the rifle 14 times from a distance of about 40 feet. The bullets struck both Grant and Michelle many times. After he finished firing the rifle, he moved closer to the car. He then took out his 9mm Ruger handgun, the one he had asked someone else to buy for him, because he was too young to buy it himself. He fired the handgun 5 more times into the car. Both Grant and Michelle were hit multiple times by the bullets. They died inside the car. After the shooting, Andrew did not drive away immediately. He had a plan to try and hide what he had done. He walked to the passenger side of the victim's car. He pulled Michelle's body out of the car. He dragged her body about 40 feet away from the car. Then he partially took off her clothes. He knelt between her legs. He chewed tobacco, and he spat his tobacco juice onto her leg. He did these things on purpose. He wanted anyone who found the bodies to think that a robbery and a sexual assault had happened. He wanted the police to look for a different kind of criminal, not for someone who had simply shot two strangers for no reason. By making it look like a sex crime, he hoped to mislead the investigators. Once he had staged the scene, Andrew got back into his Honda CRX and drove away from The Point. He left the two bodies behind. But there were other people in the area that night. Some people were camping near the lake. Other people were parked nearby. They heard the gunshots. One couple saw a Honda CRX parked near the entrance to the lake area earlier. Later, they saw headlights moving onto the point. They heard the shots. Then they saw a Honda CRX speeding away from the point very fast. The next morning, some campers went to the point and found the bodies of Grant and Michelle. They called the police immediately. The police arrived at the scene. They collected evidence. They found bullets and shell casings from the shooting. They determined that the bullets came from two types of weapons, an AR-15 rifle and a 9mm handgun. They also found the dried tobacco saliva on Michelle's leg. They took a sample of that saliva to test for DNA. But at this early stage, the police did not know who had committed the murders. They had no suspect. They could not arrest anyone. The case remained unsolved for a long time. Andrew went back to his normal life. He continued to work at the diaper factory. He kept chewing tobacco. He tried to act as if nothing had happened. But he knew that the weapons he used could connect him to the crime. To protect himself, he decided to get rid of the guns. In May of 1995, 5 months after the murders, he took his AR-15 rifle back to the gun store where he had originally bought it. He pawned it. He gave the rifle to the store in exchange for money. In July of 1995, he sold his 9mm Ruger handgun to a friend. By getting rid of both weapons, he hoped that the police would never find them and link them to the shootings. He also kept quiet about what he had done. He did not tell anyone about the murders for almost 2 years. Then, in late November of 1996, something changed. Andrew was at work at the diaper factory with a friend. The two of them were talking, and the friend asked Andrew a question. The friend asked him about the worst thing you ever did. Andrew decided to answer. He told his friend that he had killed someone with an AR-15 rifle. The friend was shocked and did not believe him at first. The friend asked why he had done it. Andrew explained his reason. He said that he did it to see if I could do it and get away with it. He did not give his friend any more details about the night. He stopped talking about it, but he had just told another person about the murders. The very next day, Andrew was at work again. He received a page on his pager. He left his work area to go and return the call. When he came back to his work area about 15 minutes later, his face was very pale. He looked extremely scared. He told his friend that he had to leave immediately. He then spit out the tobacco he was chewing into a trash can. He told his friend that someone had called him and wanted to question him about what he and the friend had talked about the day before. He also said that the person wanted to test his saliva. Andrew understood what that meant. He knew that his DNA was in his saliva. He had left his saliva on Michelle's leg at the crime scene. He said to his friend, "That's a DNA test right there, so they got my ass." He realized that the police could match his saliva to the DNA found on the victim. He was very afraid that he would be caught. A short time later, Andrew told another friend that he needed to leave town. He said that things were getting hot. He meant that the police were getting closer to him. He started thinking about running away to avoid being arrested for the murders. In early December of 1996, the police contacted Andrew's father. Andrew's father was John Cook, the FBI agent. The police asked John Cook to help them locate Andrew so they could ask him some questions. John Cook did not know that his son was a suspect. He agreed to help. On the night of December 4th, 1996, John Cook paged his son several times. Andrew called his father back around 11 o'clock that night. John Cook told Andrew that the police were looking for him about the Lake Juliet murders. He asked Andrew if he knew anything about them. At first, Andrew refused to answer. He said, "Daddy, I can't tell you, you're one of them, you're a cop." But his father insisted that he was his father first. Then John Cook asked Andrew if he had been there during the shooting. Andrew said yes. John Cook asked if Andrew saw who shot them. Andrew said yes. Then John Cook asked the most important question. He asked if Andrew had shot them. After a pause, Andrew admitted that he had. But Andrew did not tell his father the full truth. He made up a story. He said he had been fishing at Lake Juliet that night. He said he had an argument with the male victim. He claimed that the male victim threatened him with a gun, and that he shot both victims in self-defense. He also said that he later realized the victim's gun was only a pellet gun, and that he had thrown the pellet gun into the woods. This was a complete lie. There was no argument. There was no pellet gun. There was no self-defense. Andrew was trying to make his actions seem less serious to his father. He also told his father that he was not going to turn himself in. He said he was going to run away and disappear. He told his father that he planned to escape from the police. John Cook was stunned by what his son had told him. He tried to convince Andrew to go to the authorities and confess, but Andrew refused. Andrew said he would rather run. John Cook became very worried that his son might try to kill himself instead of facing the consequences. The phone call ended with Andrew still refusing to surrender. He was determined to try and escape justice. He thought he could still get away with the murders, even though his own father now knew the truth. That night, Andrew still believed he could escape. He did not know that his father would make a very difficult decision the next day, and he did not yet know that his time was running out. He had confessed to his father, he had confessed to a friend, and his DNA was already on file with the police. The net was closing around him, but he was still trying to find a way to run. The morning after the phone call, John Cook made a decision. He spoke with his wife about what his son had told him. Then he called his friend and FBI supervisor, Tom Benson, who was at a conference in New Orleans. John Cook told Benson everything Andrew had said. They agreed that Benson would fly back to Georgia immediately. The two men would go together to see Monroe County Sheriff John Biddick. John Cook would tell the sheriff what his son had confessed to him on the phone. This was a very hard decision for John Cook. He was both a father and a law enforcement officer. He chose to follow the law. He did not try to protect his son from the consequences of his actions. He went to the sheriff's office on December 5th, 1996, and reported everything. But something else happened on that same day. Before John Cook could meet with the sheriff, Andrew was arrested. A game warden, which is a type of wildlife officer, caught Andrew hunting deer and turkeys out of season. This was against the law. Andrew also gave the officer a false name when he was questioned, so the game warden arrested him. He was taken to the Jones County Sheriff's Office and held there for those violations. Meanwhile, Agent Randy Upton from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation learned that Andrew was in custody in Jones County. Agent Upton did not yet know about the confession that Andrew had made to his father the night before. He drove to Jones County to question Andrew about the Lake Juliet murders. When Agent Upton introduced himself and said he wanted to talk about the murders, Andrew did not wait to be asked questions. He started talking immediately. He blurted out, "It's been 2 years since the murders and you guys don't have anything. I had a CRX. I had an AR-15. I had a Ruger P-89. You guys are going to try to frame me." Then he added, "Get my father and get me a lawyer, and I'll tell you what you want to hear." Agent Upton stopped the interview. He could not question Andrew any further, because Andrew had asked for a lawyer. Agent Upton then learned from Sheriff Biddick that John Cook had come to the sheriff's office, and that Andrew had confessed to his father the previous night. Agent Upton arranged for Andrew to be transported to Monroe County. When Andrew arrived at the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, his father was there. John Cook asked Sheriff Biddick if he could speak alone with his son. The sheriff agreed. They were given a private room. Andrew was not handcuffed. Both father and son were crying. John Cook hugged his son. Then John Cook told Andrew that he did not believe the story Andrew had told him on the phone. He did not believe the story about the pellet gun and self-defense. Andrew then admitted the full truth. He told his father, "I pulled in, the car was already there. and I just stopped and shot them. He also admitted that he had dragged Michelle's body from the car to make it look like an assault or robbery. There was no pellet gun. There was no argument. It was a completely random killing. He had simply stopped his car and shot two strangers. After this private meeting, John Cook told Sheriff Biddick everything his son had just admitted. The police now had a full confession from Andrew, given to his father, with all the details. They also had the weapons. The police tracked down the AR-15 rifle that Andrew had pawned in May of 1995. They found the person who now owned it and took possession of the rifle. They also found the 9mm Ruger handgun that Andrew had sold to a friend in July of 1995. They recovered that weapon as well. They sent both guns to a ballistics expert for testing. The expert examined the bullets and shell casings found at the crime scene. He compared them to test bullets fired from Andrew's two weapons. The results were conclusive. The bullets that killed Grant and Michelle had been fired from Andrew's AR-15 rifle and his 9mm Ruger handgun. The police also had the DNA evidence. They had taken a sample of the dried tobacco saliva from Michelle's leg. They compared the DNA from that saliva to Andrew's DNA. It was a perfect match. The state's DNA expert testified that only 1 in 20,000 Caucasians would have the same DNA profile. This meant that the saliva on Michelle's leg had to have come from Andrew. There was no doubt left. He was the killer. Andrew was formally charged with the murders. He went to trial in March of 1998. The trial took place in Monroe County. The prosecution presented a very strong case. They called John Cook as a witness. John Cook testified about the phone confession and the private meeting where Andrew admitted the full truth. They called Andrew's friend from the diaper factory, who testified about Andrew's confession at work. They presented the ballistics evidence linking Andrew's guns to the crime scene. They presented the DNA evidence matching Andrew's saliva to the saliva found on Michelle's leg. The jury heard all of this evidence. They did not have to deliberate for very long. On March 19, 1998, the jury found Andrew Cook guilty of 2 counts of malice murder and 2 counts of felony murder. He was convicted on all charges. The trial then moved to the sentencing phase. The jury had to decide if Andrew should receive the death penalty or life in prison. The prosecution argued that the murders were completely senseless and random. They pointed out that Andrew had killed 2 innocent people just to see if he could get away with it. The defense presented family members, including John Cook, who pleaded for mercy. John Cook gave a very emotional testimony. He told the jury that he believed there was still some value and goodness in his son. He asked them to spare Andrew's life, but the jury had heard the evidence. They saw the photographs of the victims. They understood how brutal and random the killings were. After considering all the facts, the jury recommended the death penalty for the murder of Michelle Cartagena. The judge agreed with the jury and sentenced Andrew to death. For the murder of Grant Hendrickson, the judge gave Andrew a consecutive life sentence, meaning he would serve that sentence after the death penalty was carried out. After the trial, Andrew did not accept his sentence. He began a long series of appeals to try to overturn his conviction or his death sentence. His first direct appeal went to the Georgia Supreme Court. In 1999, the Georgia Supreme Court affirmed his convictions and his death sentence. He then filed a petition for a writ of certiorari with the United States Supreme Court, but that was denied in November of 1999. He then filed a habeas corpus petition in state court. This is a legal action that allows a prisoner to challenge the legality of their detention. Andrew argued that his trial lawyers had not done a good enough job, especially in investigating and presenting evidence about his mental health. In 2007, the state habeas court agreed with him. That court vacated his death sentence, meaning they removed the death penalty, but they left his convictions in place. The state of Georgia appealed that decision. In 2008, The Georgia Supreme Court reversed the habeas court's decision. They reinstated Andrew's death sentence. They found that his lawyers had not made serious enough mistakes to affect the outcome of the trial. Andrew then filed a federal habeas corpus petition in the United States District Court. The District Court denied his petition in 2010. He appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. That court also denied his appeal in April of 2012. He then filed a petition with the United States Supreme Court one more time. On January 22, 2013, the Supreme Court denied his final appeal. All of his legal options were now exhausted. There were no more courts that could hear his case. The state of Georgia set an execution date for February 21, 2013. In the days leading up to the execution, Andrew's lawyers filed one more last-minute appeal. They challenged the state's method of lethal injection. They argued that the new procedure, which used only one drug instead of 3, was not safe. The Georgia Court of Appeals temporarily stayed the execution to consider this challenge. But the Georgia Supreme Court quickly lifted the stay and allowed the execution to proceed. Andrew's lawyers then filed an emergency appeal with the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court considered the appeal and denied it just before 11 p.m. on the night of February 21, 2013. Earlier that day, Andrew had been allowed to have a last meal. He requested steak, a baked potato, potato wedges, fried shrimp, lemon meringue pie, and soda. He ate the meal. He also received visits from his family members before the execution. At the prison in Jackson, Georgia, Andrew was strapped to a gurney. He was given the chance to say final words. He said, "I'm sorry." He added, "I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. I can't even do it myself." He thanked his family for their support and apologized for taking so much from them. Then the lethal injection began at about 11:08 p.m. The single drug, pentobarbital, was injected into his body. He blinked his eyes a few times. His eyes became heavy. His chest heaved for a few minutes, and then his eyes closed. 2 doctors examined him and nodded. At 11:22 p.m., the warden pronounced Andrew Allen Cook dead. He was 38 years old. After the execution, the victims' families could finally close this chapter of their lives. Mary Hendrickson, the mother of Grant Hendrickson, had said before the execution that she had been waiting 18 years for justice. She stated that the devil would not win over her heart. Andrew's father, John Cook, had to live with the knowledge that his testimony had helped send his own son to death row. He had resigned from the FBI after the trial, but he continued to work as an investigator. He had done what he believed was right under the law, but it cost him his son. For Andrew Cook, his life ended in a prison execution chamber on a cold February night. For the families of Grant Hendrickson and Michelle Cartagena, the long wait for justice finally came to an end. The story of Andrew Cook ended with his execution, but the memories of Grant Hendrickson and Michelle Cartagena, 2 young college students whose lives were taken for no reason, remained with their families forever. Story 4. Frederick Triche was born on April 12, 1964, in the United States. He was a white male. His early life was marked by family instability and personal struggles that would follow him into adulthood. Triche's mother had a very painful childhood. She was only 2 years old when her own mother died. After that, she was sexually abused by her father and her grandfather. Because of this trauma, she spent some time living in a state mental hospital. These difficult experiences shaped her as a parent. When Triche was growing up, his mother tried to care for him, but she had her own emotional problems to deal with. Triche's parents had a troubled marriage. They divorced when Frederick was only 4 years old. This was a difficult time for him as a young child. However, his parents later remarried each other. Despite the remarriage, the family was not stable. Trisha's father was not very involved in his son's life. According to Trisha's mother, his father did not go to ball games and did not share things with Frederick that Frederick needed. Trisha's older sister described him as a daredevil when he was a young boy. She said he would try anything once, which suggested he was impulsive and took risks even as a child. Trish had difficulty in school from an early age. He always struggled with his classes. His mother tried to help him by enrolling him in the Big Brothers/Big Sisters program. This program was meant to give him a positive adult role model. However, his mother heard rumors that his assigned big brother was a homosexual. She became worried and pulled Trish out of the program. This meant he lost a potential source of support and guidance. By the time Trish reached junior high school, his behavior became worse. He started to vandalize property. He engaged in petty theft. He regularly skipped classes. He was not following the rules and was getting into trouble. These behaviors were early signs that he had difficulty controlling his impulses and following social norms. When Trish was 17 years old, he fathered a child. Becoming a parent at such a young age added more responsibility to his life. However, he did not have a stable career or education to support a family. Later in life, he found work as a heavy equipment operator. This was a physically demanding job. While working this job, Trish suffered a concussion from a workplace accident. This head injury caused him to become severely depressed. His mental health declined after this accident. Trish had a history of drug use. He became addicted to cocaine. This addiction would become a major problem in his life. He also had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is often called ADHD. This condition made it hard for him to sit still, complete his work, or remember things. He also had low self-esteem and lacked some social skills. His reading and math abilities were below average. He could read at a 7th grade level and do math at a 6th grade level. His spelling ability was at a 4th grade level. Even though he had these learning struggles, he tested in the normal range on IQ tests. Trish also had prior criminal convictions. He had been convicted of receiving stolen property. He had been convicted of forgery. He had been convicted of burglary. These convictions showed that he had a pattern of breaking the law before the events that would later define his life. He was familiar with the criminal justice system because he had been in trouble with the law several times before. His family background, his learning difficulties, his early behavior problems, his drug addiction, and his prior criminal record all shaped who he was. He had a daughter he kept in touch with, but he had not been a consistent presence in her life. He had only spent one Christmas with her over the course of her life. His family, including his father and his sister, still cared about him, but his life had many struggles, and he had not found a way to build a stable and lawful life. He continued to make choices that led him further away from a normal path. On August 27, 1994, Frederick Trish was with 3 other people. These people were Keisha Harth, Benjamin Brooks, and a man named Anthony Washington. That day, the group left Cleveland and went to a hotel room in Ashtabula, Ohio. Their purpose was to smoke crack cocaine together. After they finished smoking, they returned to Cleveland later that day to buy more drugs. While they were in Cleveland, they picked up Anthony Washington, who agreed to help them. The group then spent a couple of hours driving around and smoking more cocaine. As they kept using drugs, they ran low on money. They decided they needed to rob a business so they could get cash to purchase even more cocaine. Washington knew the area and directed the group to a specific location. He led them to the Vine Street News, which was an adult bookstore located in Eastlake, Ohio, in Lake County. Before the robbery, Trish and Brooks prepared themselves. Both men were armed. Trish carried a 9mm handgun. This gun was loaded to its maximum capacity with special bullets called Hydroshock bullets. These bullets were designed for penetration and maximum stopping power, meaning they were meant to cause severe damage. Brooks carried a sawed-off shotgun. Keisha Harth also gave Trish a roll of duct tape. Trish planned to use this tape to tie up the victims inside the store, so they could not call for help or stop the robbery. Trish and Brooks entered the Vine Street News at approximately 11:30 at night. Once inside, they pretended to look at some magazines for a short time. Then they walked toward the sales counter where a clerk named Louis Lawver was working. Trish pulled out his 9mm handgun. He cocked the gun, which means he pulled back the slide to put a bullet in the chamber. He pointed the gun directly at Lawver and gave him a clear order: "Do not move and do not call out for help." Lawver obeyed because he was afraid. Trish then asked Lawver where the security guard was located. Lawver motioned toward the rear part of the store. Trish walked through some swinging doors that led into the restricted area in the back. He put his handgun inside his pants for a moment. At that point, Lawver could no longer see Trish. In the back area, Trish saw two customers standing behind a rack looking at magazines. He also saw the store security guard, whose name was Henry Dupree. Dupree was a 58-year-old black male. He was sitting in a chair watching television. At first, neither Dupree nor the customers noticed that Trish was there. Trish took the gun back out of his pants. He poked Dupree in the shoulder with the barrel of the gun. He then ordered Dupree to stand up. Dupree was startled, but he complied and stood up. Trish later said that his original plan was to take Dupree to the front of the store and tape him up along with the clerk. However, while looking at Dupree, Trish noticed that Dupree had handcuffs attached to his pants. Trish decided to use those handcuffs to restrain Dupree instead of using duct tape. Trish reached for the handcuffs. According to Trish, a struggle started between him and Dupree at that moment. During this struggle, Trish said the handgun went off by accident. But the gun did not fire just once. Multiple shots were fired. While Trish was in the back of the store with Dupree, Brooks stayed at the front counter with Lawver. Brooks ordered Lawver to empty the cash register. Lawver did what he was told and gave Brooks the money. After that, Brooks demanded that Lawver open the safe. Lawver tried to explain that opening the safe was not possible. As Lawver was speaking, shots rang out from the back of the store. Then Trish came running back through the swinging doors very quickly. Brooks left the store immediately, taking the cash register money with him. Lawver remained standing by the counter with his hands in the air. Trish started walking toward the exit, but before he reached the door, he raised his handgun, pointed it at Lawver, and fired at least 2 shots. One bullet struck Lawver in the jaw. Another bullet struck Lawver in his forearm. Trish later claimed that he was not aiming at Lawver. He said he was aiming at the telephone that was mounted on the wall behind Lawver. Regardless of his claim, Lawver was hit and badly wounded. After Trish left the store, Lawver lost consciousness for a short time. But he woke up soon after and managed to dial 911 on the telephone to call for help. Meanwhile, Henry Dupree had been grievously injured from the gunshots in the back of the store. Despite his wounds, Dupree managed to crawl or walk through the swinging doors to the front area. However, he collapsed on the floor behind the counter. He died from his injuries. An autopsy later showed that Dupree died from 2 close-range gunshot wounds to his chest. Trish and his companions fled the scene in their car. Washington was driving the vehicle. Police officers had already been alerted about the armed robbery. Sergeant Ronald Stye of the Euclid Police Department received the dispatch. He spotted a vehicle that matched the description given by witnesses. He began to follow the car. Officer Frederick Stalt also joined the pursuit. The suspect's car drove at high speeds, exceeding 60 miles per hour, through a residential neighborhood. While Washington was driving, Trish shot out the rear window of their own car. Then both Trish and Brooks fired shots through the open window at the police cruisers behind them. They fired over the tops of the police cars to try to stop the officers from following them. Eventually, Washington lost control of the car and crashed. When the car stopped, Trish got out. He took an action stance. which means he positioned himself to fire his weapon. He pointed his handgun at Sergeant Stye and fired at least 3 shots at Stye and Stalt. Stye retreated and radioed for more help. Trish continued firing additional shots while he ran away on foot with Harth. Brooks stayed behind in the car and was caught by police at that moment. More officers arrived at the scene. They got descriptions of Trish and Harth and started chasing them on foot. The officers approached a garage. One officer, Harold Pretel, saw Trish aiming a gun at him. Pretel ordered Trish to drop the weapon. Trish threw the gun down, but then tried to escape by climbing over a fence. Several officers confronted him as he jumped over the fence and ordered him to get on the ground. Trish was then taken into custody. At that point, the crime spree had ended. This was not the only crime Trish committed during this period. He and Brooks had been on a multi-state crime spree that took them through several states including Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. During this spree, they robbed banks and other businesses. They committed sexual assaults. They stole cars. They committed carjackings. They also shot and killed a man in a Michigan robbery. That victim was Gasson Dano, who was a co-owner of a video store in Livonia, Michigan. That killing had occurred 3 days earlier, on August 25, 1994. But Trish was never charged or tried for that crime in Michigan. The crimes in the other states were also not prosecuted because Ohio chose to pursue the death penalty for the murder of Henry Dupree. The crime was discovered very quickly because of the actions of witnesses and the victims themselves. Across the street from the Vine Street News, a man named Paul Forner was using a pay telephone. He saw 2 men enter the store. A few minutes later, he heard popping sounds that he recognized as gunshots. He then saw the same 2 men leave the store. Forner rushed over to the store and found Louis Lawver on the phone with the police. Because Lawver had been shot in the face and was having difficulty speaking, Forner took the phone and gave the dispatcher a description of the suspects and their vehicle. Another customer, Dale Plunkard, had been inside the store at the time of the shooting. He had hidden in a viewing booth in the back area. From inside the booth, he heard 3 or 4 shots fired in steady succession, one right after another. When he came out, he found Henry Dupree unconscious. Plunkard was also able to identify the suspect's vehicle, which he had seen parked nearby before he entered the store. The police investigation moved forward immediately after the arrest. Trish was transported first to the Euclid Police Department and then to the Eastlake Police Department. On the way to Eastlake, Trish heard over the police radio that Dupree had died. Trish later said he had not known before that moment that he had even shot Dupree. He arrived at Eastlake just after 2 a.m. on August 28, 1994. At the station, Lieutenant Thomas Doyle and FBI Special Agent Robert Alvord conducted a series of interviews with Trish and Brooks. Some of these interviews were recorded on videotape. Trish made several statements during these interviews that incriminated him. The police recorded portions of these videotapes, and the prosecution later played them for the jury at trial. At around 2 p.m. on August 28th, Doyle confronted Trish and Brooks with the statement that the store clerk had given. At that point, both suspects refused to discuss their participation in the Vine Street News robbery any further unless they had an attorney present. However, they continued to talk about their involvement in other crimes committed in other states. The legal process moved forward quickly. On August 29, 1994, just 2 days after the murder, the Lake County Grand Jury returned a 7-count indictment against Trish. The charges included aggravated murder, 2 counts of attempted aggravated murder, felonious assault, aggravated robbery, failure to comply with a police officer, and carrying a weapon while under a disability. Trish was brought to trial before a jury in Lake County. During the trial, the prosecution presented evidence including the testimony of Louis Lawver, who survived his wounds and was able to tell the jury what happened. The prosecution also presented physical evidence, expert testimony, and the videotaped statements that Trish had made to police. The defense argued that Trish had not intended to kill Dupree and that the gun went off during a struggle. They also pointed to his drug addiction and his troubled background. The jury considered all the evidence and found Trish guilty on 5 counts. He was found guilty of aggravated murder, which included 2 aggravating circumstances. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of attempted aggravated murder, 1 count of felonious assault, and 1 count of aggravated robbery. Each of these 5 counts included a firearm specification. The 6th count, which alleged that Trish failed to comply with a police officer, was dismissed. Trish pleaded guilty to the 7th count, which was carrying a weapon while under a disability. After the guilt phase, the case moved to the penalty phase. In this phase, the jury had to decide whether Trish should receive the death penalty or life in prison. The defense presented witnesses who testified about Trish's family history, his difficult childhood, his ADHD, his depression, and his cocaine addiction. Trish's father, his daughter, and other family members spoke about how they would miss him if he were executed. A psychologist testified about his mental health issues. Trish also made an unsworn statement in which he apologized to Dupree's family and acknowledged that what he did was wrong. The prosecution presented victim impact testimony. Henry Dupree's daughter, Linda Lucassen, spoke about how much her family would miss her father. However, she also told the court that they wanted Trish to receive the death penalty. This statement was improper under the law because it directly recommended a specific sentence. The judge heard this statement after the jury had already made its recommendation and had been excused. The judge did not rely on this improper recommendation when making his final decision. The jury recommended that Trish be sentenced to death. The trial judge, James W. Jackson, adopted the jury's recommendation and sentenced Trish to death on March 2, 1995. In addition to the death sentence for the aggravated murder, Trish received prison sentences of 10 to 25 years for the other charges, which were merged with other counts. Trish did not accept his sentence without a fight. He filed a direct appeal to the Ohio Supreme Court. In his appeal, he raised many arguments. He claimed that the pretrial publicity had made it impossible for him to get a fair trial. He claimed that the prosecutor had made improper statements during the trial. He claimed that his Miranda rights had been violated because he had not been properly warned of his rights before being interrogated. He claimed that some of his statements should have been suppressed. He also claimed that his trial lawyers had been ineffective for failing to challenge certain jurors. The Ohio Supreme Court reviewed all of these claims. In a detailed decision issued in 2001, the court rejected each of his arguments and affirmed both his convictions and his death sentence. The court found that the evidence was sufficient to support the guilty verdicts. The court also conducted its own independent review of the sentence and concluded that the aggravating circumstances outweighed the mitigating factors and that the death penalty was proportionate to other similar cases. Trish then appealed to the United States Supreme Court, but that court refused to hear his case. After his direct appeals failed, Trish pursued other legal options. He filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus in federal court. This is a way for a prisoner to challenge the legality of his detention. The federal district court denied his petition. Trish appealed that decision to the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. In 2010, the Sixth Circuit also denied his petition. The court ruled that his Miranda warnings had been sufficient, that he had waived his rights knowingly, and that his trial lawyers had not been ineffective. The court also refused to expand the certificate of appealability to include a claim about the method of lethal injection. After this federal appeal failed, all of Trish's legal options were exhausted. Trish then sought clemency from the state of Ohio. He asked the Ohio Parole Board to recommend that the governor commute his death sentence to life in prison. His lawyers argued that his cocaine addiction, his mental health problems, and his remorse warranted mercy. They also claimed that his rights had been violated during his interrogation. The parole board held a meeting on January 31st, 2013. Trish declined to be interviewed by the board. The board viewed this refusal as evidence that he had not grown or improved as a person. The board voted unanimously against recommending clemency. The board stated that the evidence showed Dupree was seated when he was shot and had not posed a threat to Trish. The board also noted that Trish had shot Lawver in the face as he was leaving the store, which showed murderous intent. Governor John Kasich reviewed the case and denied Trish's clemency request in late February 2013. On March 6, 2013, Frederick Trish was executed at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, Ohio. The execution was carried out by lethal injection. The prison staff administered a single powerful dose of pentobarbital. There was some difficulty inserting the intravenous lines, and a trickle of blood ran down Trish's arm during the attempts. Trish spoke a few times during the insertion process. He yawned shortly after the drug began flowing, and then his mouth fell open, and he became still. He was pronounced dead at 10:37 a.m. by the warden, Donald Morgan. He was 48 years old. Before his execution, Trish was given a final meal. He chose steak, eggs, hash browns, cottage cheese, onion rings, and a hot fudge sundae. In his final statement, Trish said, "This is where drugs lead you." He apologized for the death of Henry Dupree and said he was sorry to Dupree's family. However, he also said he would not apologize to the family members of Ghassan Dano, the Michigan victim, who were present as witnesses. He said, "I've never been tried, never been charged with that crime. I am here for Henry Dupree." He also said, "You want closure? Closure only comes with a book. You close it and put it on a shelf. There is no closure. Every holiday, every birthday, everything, you will think about the victim. So if you want me murdered, just say it." After the execution, the Lake County prosecutor noted that Dupree's family members were too elderly or ill to attend. They gave up their witness seats to Dano's family. Deanne Dano, Ghassan's sister-in-law, said that justice had been served and that there was one less sadistic killer in the world. Frank Dano, who had witnessed his brother's murder and had been shot himself, did not attend the execution. He said the pain would be too much. He described losing his brother as a loss that never goes away, every single day. Zena Dano, Ghassan's widow, said that the execution did not bring relief, and that the 3-minute phone call that informed her of her husband's death had turned her life completely upside down. She raised their 2 young children alone. Benjamin Brooks, Trish's accomplice, pleaded guilty in April 1995 to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison and was still serving that sentence at the time of Trish's execution. Trish was the 50th inmate executed in Ohio since the state resumed executions in 1999, and he was the 4th person executed in the United States in 2013. The story of Frederick Trish ended with his death on March 6, 2013, but the families of his victims continued to live with the pain of their loss for the rest of their lives. Story 5. Stephen Ray Thacker was born on November 21, 1970. His early years were not stable or happy. His parents divorced when he was only 3 years old. After the divorce, his mother had to work 2 jobs to support the family. Because she was working so much, she often left Stephen and his sister, who was only 2 years older than him, alone. From the time Stephen was 7 years old, he was mostly in the care of his sister. This meant he had very little supervision from an adult. Over time, Stephen developed a lot of anger toward his older sister, and their relationship was never good. Stephen's childhood was also marked by physical abuse. His mother physically hurt him, and his father was almost completely absent from his life. Stephen felt abandoned by his father and resented him for not being around. As a result of all these problems at home, Stephen grew up as an angry child. He could not control his temper, and he often got into trouble. School was very difficult for Stephen. He did not perform well in his classes. He frequently got into fights with other students. He skipped school often, and sometimes he even ran away from home. His grades were so poor that he failed first grade, and then later failed seventh grade. Eventually, he quit school entirely in the ninth grade. He never finished high school at that time, although he would later earn his GED while in prison. Stephen started using drugs and alcohol at a very young age. When he was 14, he began smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol. By the time he was 15, he was using harder drugs like crack, powder cocaine, and LSD. His substance abuse continued to get worse. When he was 16, he was already an alcoholic. Stephen's mother remarried when he was 15 years old. Stephen claimed that his new stepfather abused him. He also said that his maternal uncle abused him as well. Because of these problems at home, he ran away from home several times during his teenage years. He could not find a stable place to live, and he had no one to guide him in the right direction. As a teenager, Stephen began committing crimes. He was arrested for burglary, theft, and auto theft. He was sent to a drug rehabilitation facility, but it did not stop his behavior. One time, he stole a car from the business where his father worked. He drove that car to Florida and wrecked it. He suffered serious injuries in that crash, including a collapsed lung and damage to his spine. At the age of 17, Stephen was arrested again, this time for breaking and entering. He served 6 months in prison for that crime. The next year, when he was 18, he was arrested for writing bad checks. He was given probation for that offense, but he did not stay out of trouble. He was soon caught stealing a truck, and he served 2 more years in prison in Ohio. After he was released, he violated his parole by stealing a motorcycle and wrecking it. That violation sent him back to prison for even more time. Stephen did have one long-term relationship during his 20s. He met a woman named Kim Bowen in West Virginia. They were together for about 4 years, and they lived together for 3 of those years. Kim later said that Stephen was the love of her life. When he was with her, he was good with her children, and he had many good qualities. However, he also had very severe mood swings. He would get angry and agitated for no clear reason. He would also cry and feel hopeless. Kim convinced Stephen to see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist diagnosed him with bipolar disorder. He had episodes of depression, crying spells, insomnia, and suicidal thoughts. When Stephen took his medication, called lithium, his impulsive behavior improved. But like many people with this condition, he decided to stop taking the drug. After he stopped his medication, his behavior worsened again. He cheated on Kim and impregnated a young girl. He had very little to do with his own child after that. In 1997, he was arrested again for trespassing and for an outstanding warrant. Later, Stephen met and married a woman named Trina Thacker. The couple lived in Locust Grove, Oklahoma. At first, things seemed to go well. His landlord testified that Stephen was very kind and loving toward her, toward Trina, and toward Trina's daughter. He helped the landlord with many things. But soon the marriage began to fall apart. Stephen lost his job, and he fell deeply into debt. He became desperate and impulsive. His mood swings became dramatic and hard to control. Mental health experts later examined Stephen. They found that he had average intelligence and that his higher thinking functions were generally normal. However, his judgment and impulse control were not strong. It was also noted that Stephen had suffered a head injury when he was about 2 years old. He had fallen from a moving car, which may have affected his brain. An expert later explained that Stephen committed his actions while suffering from extreme mental and emotional disturbance caused by his bipolar disorder. This condition is lifelong and episodic, meaning there are times when he could return to a normal state. But during his bad episodes, he did not think about the consequences of his actions. He just did things without reflection or reason. The condition tended to get worse over time. Still, there was no indication that Stephen could not understand the difference between right and wrong when he acted. He knew his actions were wrong, but he could not control his impulses. 7 months before the crimes he would later commit, Stephen was released from a Florida prison. He had been serving time for writing bad checks. He was out of prison, but he had no stable job, no money, and a growing family to support. He was working as a plumber's helper, but he was laid off from that job just before the events that would change everything. He was desperate for money. He needed cash to buy Christmas presents for his wife and her 2 children. His debts were piling up, and he did not see any legal way out of his problems. He was deeply in debt, unemployed, and his marriage was falling apart. His mind was racing, and he was not thinking clearly. He was looking for a quick solution to his money problems. Stephen was looking for a quick solution to his money problems. On the morning of December 23, 1999, he sat down with the Tulsa newspaper and looked through the classified advertisements. He called several phone numbers from the ads. He thought about where each person lived. He wanted to find someone who lived in a nice area where he thought there might be money. One ad caught his attention. It was placed by a 25-year-old woman named Lacey Dawn Hill. She was selling a pool table from her home in Bixby, Oklahoma, which is south of Tulsa. Stephen called the number, and Lacey answered. He told her he was interested in the pool table, and she gave him directions to her house. He made arrangements to come over later that morning. When Stephen arrived at Lacey's home, she let him inside. She did not know that he had no intention of buying the pool table. Instead, Stephen had planned to rob her. As soon as he was inside, he pulled out a knife and demanded money. Lacey was scared, but she told him that she did not have any cash in the house. She said she could go to an ATM machine and get money for him. Stephen decided to take her with him. He forced her at knife point to go outside and get into his car. He did not take her to an ATM. Instead, he drove her to a remote and rundown cabin in the countryside of Mays County, Oklahoma. He knew this cabin because he was familiar with the area. At the cabin, Stephen tied Lacey to a chair using plastic zip ties. He told her that he would let her go if she had sex with him. Then he forced her to have sexual intercourse with him against her will. He raped her. After that, he tied her to the chair again and left the cabin. But as he walked away, he became very scared. He realized that if Lacey escaped, she would go to the police. She could identify him, and he would be caught. He knew he had already committed kidnapping and rape, and he did not want to go back to prison. So he turned around and went back into the cabin. He decided to kill Lacey to stop her from telling anyone. He untied her from the chair and tried to strangle her. He used his hands and also a piece of cloth to squeeze her neck. Lacey fought back with great strength. She struggled hard to stay alive. Because she was fighting so much, Stephen could not strangle her to death. His attempt was not working, so he took out his knife and stabbed her twice in the chest. These wounds were deep, and they pierced her left lung. Lacey bled heavily inside her body. She died from these stab wounds. After she was dead, Stephen covered her body with box springs and several mattresses. He left her lying on the cabin floor. He then removed her pants and underwear and left them near her body. He took her purse, which contained her credit cards and debit cards. Then he drove away. After killing Lacey, Stephen went on a crime spree. He used Lacey's stolen credit and debit cards to buy Christmas presents for his wife and her children. He knew that the police would soon notice that Lacey was missing. He also knew that the stores had surveillance cameras. In fact, his image was captured on a surveillance tape when he used Lacey's debit card at a store. The police started looking for him, but they had not yet found him. He decided to flee the state of Oklahoma to avoid capture. Stephen drove to Missouri. On December 26, 1999, 3 days after killing Lacey, he carjacked a family. The family included an elderly woman, a younger woman, and a child. Stephen pushed the younger female driver out of the car. Then he got into the driver's seat and drove away with the elderly woman and the child still inside the car. He drove for a while and then let them go unharmed. He did not hurt them. After that, Stephen hid in the woods for a couple of days to stay ahead of the police. He broke into several homes. During one of these burglaries, the homeowner came back unexpectedly. That homeowner was a 24-year-old man named Forrest Reed Boyd. Forrest walked into his home and found Stephen inside. Stephen did not want to be caught. He attacked Forrest and stabbed him several times in the back. Forrest died from these stab wounds. Stephen then stole Forrest's car and his credit cards. He left in that car and drove toward Tennessee. Stephen drove Forrest's stolen car for a long distance. Eventually, the car broke down in Tennessee. The car stopped working completely. Stephen needed help, so he called a towing company for a tow truck. The tow truck driver who came to help was a 52-year-old man named Ray Patterson. Ray arrived and towed the broken car to his service station. When they got to the station, Stephen tried to pay Ray using one of the stolen credit cards. He did not have any real money. But when Ray ran the credit card, the transaction was rejected. Ray told Stephen that the card was no good. Ray refused to give the credit card back to Stephen because Stephen could not pay the bill. This confrontation made Stephen very nervous. He was already wanted for the murders of Lacey and Forrest. He knew that if Ray called the police, he would be caught. So Stephen took out a knife and stabbed Ray Patterson. He stabbed him and killed him. Then he took Ray's belongings, including credit cards and a pistol, and fled the scene. He went to a Super 8 motel in Union City, Tennessee, and checked into a room. He had hair dye, blood-stained coats, and several knives with him. He was still on the run, but he had left a trail of bodies across 3 states. The police in Tennessee were now actively searching for him because they knew about the stolen credit cards and the murder of Ray Patterson. They were closing in on his location. The police in Tennessee quickly connected the stolen credit cards used by Stephen to the murder of Ray Patterson. They traced his location to the Super 8 motel in Union City, Tennessee. Officers surrounded the motel and arrested Stephen without further violence. He was now in custody. After the arrest, police searched Stephen's motel room. Inside, they found several items that belonged to Ray Patterson, including credit cards. They also found a pistol, hair dye, 2 blood-stained coats, and 2 knives. When they searched the broken-down car that Stephen had been driving, they found a 3rd knife. This knife was covered in Ray Patterson's blood. This evidence clearly connected Stephen to Ray's murder. Police also had surveillance footage from stores where Stephen had used Lacey's debit card. They had physical evidence from the cabin where Lacey's body was found, including DNA and the knife used in her murder. The case against Stephen was very strong. While Stephen was in police custody in Tennessee, he gave a videotaped confession. He admitted everything. He told authorities how he had left his home in Choteau, Oklahoma, around December 28, 1999, and traveled to Missouri. He explained how he had committed the murders. He admitted to raping Lacey Hill and then returning to kill her because he was afraid she would turn him in. He also admitted to killing Forrest Boyd and Ray Patterson. The confession was recorded and later used in court. The investigation spread across 3 states. Oklahoma authorities took charge of the case involving Lacey Hill. They charged Stephen with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and first-degree rape. Missouri authorities charged him with the murder of Forrest Boyd. Tennessee authorities charged him with the murder of Ray Patterson. Stephen was tried first in Tennessee for killing Ray Patterson. A jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death for that murder. He was also sentenced to life in prison for the Missouri murder of Forrest Boyd after pleading guilty in that state. Then Stephen was brought back to Oklahoma to face justice for Lacey Hill's murder. The trial proceedings began in Mays County, Oklahoma. On December 2, 2002, Stephen made a decision. He waived his right to a jury trial and entered a blind guilty plea. This meant he pleaded guilty to all charges without any deal or agreement from the prosecution. He admitted in open court that he took Lacey from her home by force, raped her, and killed her on December 23, 1999. He said he was pleading guilty because he was in fact guilty, and he did not want to cause Lacey's family more pain by forcing them to endure a long trial. After his guilty plea, a separate hearing was held to determine his punishment. Stephen waived his right to have a jury decide his sentence. Instead, he asked the judge to decide. The judge heard evidence about the aggravating circumstances of the crime and also heard mitigating evidence from Stephen's family and a psychiatrist about his bipolar disorder. The judge found that the aggravating circumstances outweighed the mitigating factors. He sentenced Stephen to death for the first-degree murder of Lacey Hill. The judge also sentenced Stephen to 10 years in prison for the kidnapping and 50 years for the rape. All sentences were ordered to be served consecutively. The formal sentencing took place on December 23, 2002, exactly 3 years after Lacey's murder. Stephen had the right to appeal his death sentence. His attorney filed a direct appeal with the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. In the appeal, Stephen argued that the aggravating circumstances should have been included in the original charges and that the heinous, atrocious, or cruel aggravating factor was unconstitutional. The court reviewed the case and rejected these arguments. In October 2004, the court affirmed his convictions and his death sentence. Stephen then filed a petition for post-conviction relief, claiming his trial attorneys had been ineffective. That was also denied by the Oklahoma court in September 2005. He took his case to the federal courts. He filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus in federal district court, but that court denied his request for relief in September 2010. He appealed that decision to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. In May 2012, the 10th Circuit affirmed the denial of his habeas petition. Stephen then filed a final appeal with the United States Supreme Court. In January 2013, the Supreme Court denied his appeal. All of his legal options were now exhausted. After the Supreme Court's denial, the Oklahoma Attorney General requested that an execution date be set. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals set the date for March 12, 2013. Stephen was moved from death row in Tennessee, where he had been held, to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. He had the right to request a clemency hearing, but he waived that right. He did not ask for mercy. On the day of the execution, March 12, 2013, Stephen was given his last meal around noon. He chose a large meat lover's pizza, a small bag of peanut M&Ms, and an A&W root beer. During the hours before the execution, he visited with clergy and with his stepfather, Donald Johnston. At 6:02 p.m., the blinds between the witness room and the execution chamber were raised. Witnesses included members of the media, family members of all three victims, Stephen's stepfather, representatives from the Federal Public Defender's Office, law enforcement officials, and prison staff. Stephen was lying on the execution table. Warden Anita Trammell asked if Stephen had any final words. Stephen gave a statement. He apologized sincerely to the families of Lacey Hill, Forrest Boyd, and Ray Patterson. He said he did not deserve their forgiveness, but he hoped they would forgive him for the pain he had caused. He thanked his family and friends for their love and support. He said that Jesus Christ died for his sins and that God had forgiven him. He said that eternity in heaven was his. After his statement, he turned his head slightly and winked at his stepfather. At 6:03 p.m., the warden gave the order to begin the execution process. The lethal drugs were injected into Stephen's system. At 6:05 p.m., his lips bubbled outward and he exhaled heavily. At 6:06 p.m., his lips moved slightly, and the color began to drain from his face. At 6:10 p.m., the attending physician pronounced Stephen Ray Thacker dead. After the execution, Lacey Hill's best friend gave a statement on behalf of the family. She thanked everyone for their support over the past 13 years. She said that time heals wounds, but Lacey's murder had left a huge scar. She said that justice needed to be served, and that 13 years was long enough. She believed Stephen deserved to be punished. She also said that his death would not erase what happened, but now they could focus on happier memories of Lacey. Lacey's father had been attending grief counseling for years. The family had suffered greatly. Stephen's actions had destroyed a family and taken away a young woman who was just starting her life. Stephen's wife and her children were also affected, as they lost their husband and stepfather to prison and then to execution. The families of Forrest Boyd and Ray Patterson also had to live with their losses. All three families had attended the execution to see justice carried out. Stephen Ray Thacker was the first person executed in Oklahoma in 2013, the fifth in the United States that year, and the 103rd executed in Oklahoma since 1976. The three-state killing spree that began on December 23, 1999, finally came to a complete end on March 12, 2013. Story 6. Ricky Lynn Lewis was born on July 21, 1962, in Smith County, Texas. He grew up in that same area. His family life was not easy. His mother was abused, and his father also abused Ricky when he was a child. When Ricky was 10 years old, he shot his father. He did this to protect his mother from the abuse. This was a major event in his early life, but he was only a child at the time. Ricky went to school in Smith County. He did not do well in his classes. He had trouble learning and was placed in special education classes. He did not finish high school. He dropped out after completing the 9th grade. Later in life, people who worked with him noticed he had a hard time understanding things. For example, one of his lawyers said he needed to speak to Ricky on a 2nd grade level for Ricky to understand him clearly. As a young adult, Ricky worked as a laborer. He did manual work, but he did not keep a steady job. He had trouble staying out of trouble with the law. His first prison sentence came in 1983. He was convicted of burglary of a building and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. He did not serve the full time. He was paroled and released in April 1984, after only about 6 months. After his release, Ricky could not stay out of trouble. He was sent back to prison twice in the next 2 years because he broke the rules of his parole. In January 1986, he committed another serious crime. He tried to burglarize a family's vehicles. An 18-year-old girl tried to stop him. Ricky assaulted her during this attempt. He was arrested and convicted for burglary of a vehicle. He received a 5-year prison sentence. Again, he was released after a short time. In June 1988, Ricky was in trouble with the law again. He was convicted of burglary of a building for a 3rd time. This time, the judge gave him a much longer sentence, 25 years in prison. But the rules in Texas at that time allowed for early release because the prisons were too full. Because of this, Ricky was paroled and released back into the community in March 1990. He had only served a small part of his 25-year sentence. Once he was out, Ricky continued to commit crimes. In July 1990, he stole a pickup truck. The police chased him. He crashed the truck into a tree and ran away from the scene. The police caught him a short time later. Then on September 13, 1990, Ricky committed another robbery. He used a sawed-off shotgun to rob a retail store in Tyler, Texas. He took cash from the store and also kidnapped the store manager, an elderly woman. He led her to the side of a building and told her to turn her back. He raised the gun as if he was going to shoot her. But at that exact moment, a car drove past. Ricky became scared and ran into a nearby field, leaving the woman alive. The police later identified him as the robber from this incident. These events happened one after another. Each crime led to the next, and each time Ricky was released, he committed another crime. By September 1990, Ricky was back on the streets and had already committed a robbery just 4 days earlier. He was still free and living in Smith County, the same area where he had grown up. On September 17, 1990, just 4 days after he had robbed the store in Tyler, Ricky Lewis committed another crime. This time he went to a house in northwest Smith County, Texas. The house belonged to a 45-year-old man named George Ray Newman. Newman lived there with his fiancée, Connie Hilton. It was early in the morning, around the middle of the night. The exact time was not recorded, but it was still dark outside. Connie Hilton was asleep in the bedroom. She was awakened by the sound of her dog barking loudly. The dog was inside the house. Connie got out of bed to check what was making the dog bark. She walked toward the hallway. When she looked into the hallway, she saw a man standing there. He was holding a shotgun. Connie was very scared, and she screamed loudly. Her scream woke up George Newman, who was still in the bedroom. Newman got up quickly and came toward the hallway to protect Connie. As soon as he appeared, the man with the shotgun fired the gun. The shot hit Newman in the face. Newman fell to the floor and died instantly. The dog was also shot and killed during this same moment. After Newman was shot, Connie ran into the bathroom to hide. She thought she might be safe there, but the man with the shotgun followed her. He pointed the gun at her and said, "Shut up or I'll shoot you too." Connie was terrified, but she tried to fight him. She struggled with him, but he hit her on the head at least 2 times with the gun or with his fist. The blows hurt her and made her stop fighting. She gave up and stopped resisting. At this point, Connie realized she was not dealing with just one person. 2 other men were also in the house. One of these 2 men helped the first man lift Connie up from the floor. They told her to cover her eyes with her hands. She did what they said because she was afraid. They led her outside the house, and then back inside again into the living room. In the living room, the first man, the same one who had found her in the bathroom, sexually assaulted her. This assault lasted for a long time, over an hour. While this was happening, Connie could hear the other 2 men moving around the house. They were opening drawers and cabinets. She understood that they were stealing things from the house. After the sexual assault, the same man took Connie into the kitchen. He tied her hands together and tied her feet together. She could not move. From the kitchen, she continued to hear the other 2 men ransacking the house. They were taking valuables. Then the man who had assaulted her placed the barrel of the gun between her legs. He told her, "Quit whimpering. Somebody will find you in the morning." He meant that she should stop crying and that she would not be killed, but she would be left there until morning. He and the other 2 men then left the house. They took Connie's truck and drove away. The truck was her personal vehicle. Connie was left alone in the kitchen with her hands and feet tied. She knew she had to get free. She worked hard and managed to untie herself. Once she was free, she crawled through the house to find George Newman. She reached his body and saw that he was dead. She knew she could not stay there. She climbed out of a window to get outside. She found another vehicle. It is not clear if it was her own truck that was left behind or another car, and she drove to a nearby store. She was still frightened and did not turn on the headlights because she was afraid of being seen. She ran into a few trees on the way, but she made it to the store. She went inside and called for help. The police and emergency services were notified about the attack. The next morning, the police found Connie's truck. It had been abandoned somewhere else. They recovered it and began to look at it for evidence. At the house, they found traces of blood, and they also found semen from the sexual assault. They collected hairs from the room where the assault happened. The police noticed that some items from Newman's house were missing, but at that time they did not yet know who had taken them. Connie Hilton was able to tell the police what had happened, but she could not identify the men because she had been told to cover her eyes, and she was too scared to see their faces clearly. The police had a description of the attackers, but they did not make any arrests right away. In the days following the crime, some people in the community noticed that Ricky Lewis had possession of items that had been stolen from Newman's house. These people saw him with those objects, but they did not call the police immediately. They later told the police about what they had seen. This information would eventually lead to Lewis being identified as a suspect, but at that point the police had not yet arrested him. The investigation was still in its early stages. The police collected evidence from the house, from Connie's truck, and from Connie herself. They sent the blood and semen samples to a laboratory for DNA testing, but the results would take some time to come back. They knew they were looking for 3 men, but only one of them would soon be linked to the crime through the evidence. The police did not arrest anyone on the night of the crime. They had Connie Hilton's description of the attackers, but she had been forced to cover her eyes, so she could not see their faces clearly. She could only describe their voices and general physical traits. For 3 days, the police continued their investigation. They collected evidence from the house and from Connie's truck, which had been recovered the next morning. They took samples of blood from the floor and from the truck, and they also collected semen from the house and from Connie. All of these samples were sent to a crime laboratory for testing. On September 20th, 1990, 3 days after the murder, the police received a new lead. Some people in the community told the police that they had seen Ricky Lewis with items that had been stolen from George Newman's house. The police followed this information and arrested Lewis on that same day. Once Lewis was in custody, the police took a sample of his blood. They also took samples of his hair and other biological materials. The laboratory compared Lewis's blood to the blood found at the crime scene and in Connie's truck. The DNA from Lewis matched the blood found in both places. The laboratory also compared Lewis's DNA to the semen found in the house and on Connie Hilton. That DNA also matched Lewis. This was very strong evidence that Lewis was the man who had sexually assaulted Connie and had been present during the murder. The pubic hairs found in the room where the assault happened were also consistent with samples taken from Lewis. The police continued to look for the other 2 men who had been in the house, but they never found them. Lewis never told the police or anyone else who those 2 men were. He kept their identities secret. Connie Hilton remained worried for many years that those 2 men might come back to harm her, but they never did. Lewis was charged with capital murder. Under Texas law, a person can be convicted of capital murder even if they did not personally fire the fatal shot. If the person was taking part in certain serious crimes like burglary or aggravated sexual assault, and someone died during those crimes, the person can be found guilty of capital murder. The prosecutors argued that Lewis had entered Newman's house to commit burglary and had also committed aggravated sexual assault. During these crimes, George Newman was killed. Therefore, Lewis was responsible for the murder, even if another man had fired the gun. The first trial began in April 1994. The jury heard all of the evidence, including Connie Hilton's testimony and the DNA results. The jury found Lewis guilty of capital murder. During the punishment phase, the jury decided that Lewis should receive the death penalty. The judge sentenced him to death by lethal injection. Lewis appealed his death sentence. In June 1996, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed with one of his arguments. The court found that the judge had given the jury incorrect instructions when they were deciding the punishment. The court reversed the death sentence, but did not overturn the conviction. This meant that Lewis would have a second trial, but only to decide his punishment, not to decide if he was guilty. The second punishment hearing took place in February 1997. A new jury heard evidence about Lewis's criminal history and the details of the crime. They again decided that Lewis should receive the death penalty. The judge sentenced him to death for the second time. Lewis appealed again, but this time the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the sentence in June 1999. Over the next several years, Lewis filed many appeals. In 2002, the United States Supreme Court ruled in a case called Atkins v. Virginia that executing people who are mentally retarded is unconstitutional. Lewis's lawyers filed new appeals arguing that Lewis was mentally retarded and could not be executed. They presented evidence that Lewis had a low IQ and had been in special education classes. The state court held a hearing on this issue. Several experts testified. One expert gave Lewis an IQ score of 59, while another gave him a score of 79. The state court did not find Lewis's evidence convincing. The court ruled that Lewis had not proven by a preponderance of the evidence that he was mentally retarded. The court relied on testimony from other experts who said his IQ was not low enough, and that his behavior showed he was not significantly impaired. Lewis's lawyers took this issue to the federal courts. The federal courts also reviewed the case. In 2008, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals remanded the case back to the lower court to consider new evidence. But after further review, the federal district court again ruled that Lewis was not mentally retarded. The Fifth Circuit upheld this ruling in 2012. The United States Supreme Court refused to review the case in January 2013. After all of the appeals were exhausted, the trial court in Smith County set Lewis's execution date for April 9, 2013. Lewis's lawyers filed a request for clemency with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. The board voted unanimously to deny the request. No last-minute appeals were filed to stop the execution. On the evening of April 9, 2013, Ricky Lewis was taken to the execution chamber at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in Huntsville, Texas. Connie Hilton was present and watched through a glass window. Lewis made a final statement. He apologized to Connie for the rape, but he said he did not kill George Newman and did not rob the house. He said the two other men were still alive and were the ones who had committed those acts. He also said he had learned to read and write while on death row. He thanked his friends and then said, "Okay, let me rest." The lethal injection was started. Lewis said he could feel the drug burning his arm and in his throat. He said he felt dizzy. He then lost consciousness and was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m. After the execution, Connie Hilton spoke about the case. She said that the execution did not bring total closure to her, but it was one chapter closing. She had married someone else after the attack, but she always remembered George Newman and his smile and caring attitude. She continued to work with a program that helped prison inmates understand the impact of crime on victims. The two other men involved in the crime were never caught, and their identities remained unknown. The legal case against Ricky Lynn Lewis ended with his execution, but the effects of the crime stayed with Connie Hilton for the rest of her life.